The summoning circle. The dusty tome slipped from Cale Thorne's fingers as thunder crashed outside the abandoned tower. At 23, he had spent countless hours in forgotten libraries and crumbling ruins. But nothing had prepared him for the intricate symbols carved into this chamber's stone floor. The ancient text had called it the Circle of Eternal Binding, though the faded illustrations made little sense. Lightning illuminated the room, casting eerie shadows across the circular patterns that seemed to pulse with their own rhythm. Kyle knelt, tracing the symbols with trembling fingers. The stone felt warm beneath his touch, responding to some latent energy he didn't understand. His grandmother had always whispered that their family carried old blood, but he'd dismissed such tales as folklore. Fascinating, he murmured, pulling out his journal to sketch the markings. The symbols appeared to be a fusion of demonic script and celestial runes, a combination that should have been impossible. As he worked, drops of rain from a leak in the ceiling splashed onto the circle's center, mixing with the dust to form muddy rivulets that followed the carved channels perfectly. The moment water completed the circuit, the tower shook. The symbols erupted in brilliant purple light, forcing Cale to shield his eyes. Ancient magic surged through the room like a living thing, seeking something it had long awaited. The air crackled with power, and reality seemed to bend at the circle's edge. "Who dares disturb my slumber?" The voice resonated from everywhere and nowhere, rich and melodious despite its underlying menace. "Who calls to me across the void?" As the light faded, Cale's breath caught in his throat. Before him materialized the most beautiful and terrifying being he had ever witnessed. She stood nearly 6 feet tall, her lithe form draped in flowing dark fabric that seemed to absorb light itself. Her skin was a deep, lustrous purple that caught the magical glow, and long silver hair cascaded over her shoulders like liquid moonlight. But it was her eyes that held him captive. Violet flames danced within them, ancient and sorrowful, carrying the weight of countless years. 2 elegant horns curved from her temples, and gossamer wings stretched behind her, their membranes shimmering with constellations of tiny lights. "A human child," she said, tilting her head as those mesmerizing eyes fixed on him. "How curious. The circle has not been activated for—" She paused, considering. 7 centuries, I believe." Cale tried to speak, but found his voice caught in his throat. The being before him radiated power that made his knees weak, yet something in her expression spoke of profound loneliness rather than malice. "I am Lyrelei, Queen of the Twilight Realm, Sovereign of the Shadowed Host." Her voice carried the weight of titles earned through eons of rule. "And you, little scholar, have bound yourself to me through blood and intent." "Bound?" Cale finally managed to croak, his voice barely a whisper. She gestured to the circle where he noticed his blood had mixed with the rainwater from a small cut on his finger. "The summoning requires a blood offering freely given. You have called me forth, and now—" Her expression softened almost imperceptibly. "Now we are connected until the binding is resolved." Suddenly, ethereal chains of silver light materialized around her wrists and ankles, connecting to anchor points beyond the visible realm. She tested them with a casual tug, causing them to ring like distant bells. "Still bound," she murmured with what might have been disappointment. After all these years, still bound. Kyle found his courage returning as scholarly curiosity overcame his fear. "Bound by what? The circle?" Lyrelei looked at him with something approaching surprise. Most humans flee screaming by now. "You are different." She moved closer, her movements fluid like water until she stood at the circle's edge. "I am cursed, young scholar, trapped between realms, neither fully here nor there, for a transgression I committed long ago." "What kind of curse? The kind that can only be broken by—" She paused, studying his face intently. Then her eyes widened in recognition. "By the ancestors. You carry their mark." She reached toward him but stopped as the chains tightened. "You're the one who can break my curse." The words hung in the air between them like a challenge and a promise, changing everything in an instant. The curse revealed. 3 days passed before Cale returned to the tower, his mind consumed by questions that ordinary books couldn't answer. When he climbed the winding stairs, he found Lyrelei exactly where he'd left her, though she now sat gracefully on the stone floor within the circle's confines. Her purple skin seemed paler in the daylight streaming through the cracked windows. "You came back," she said without looking up from the small flame dancing between her palms. "I wondered if you would." "I had to know," Kyle admitted, settling cross-legged just outside the circle. About the curse. About why you recognized me. Lyrelai extinguished the flame with a gentle breath and finally met his eyes. In the soft light, he could see exhaustion etched in her features. Tell me, young scholar, what do you know of the Thornwood lineage? Only stories. My grandmother claimed we descended from mages who served the old kingdom of Asteria. He paused, studying her reaction. But that was supposedly 1,000 years ago. 1,017 years, she corrected softly. I remember because that's when Matthias Thornwood cursed me to this existence. The name hit Kyle like a physical blow. He'd seen it countless times in genealogy records, always dismissing it as coincidence. Matthias was my ancestor? Your great ancestor. Many generations removed. Lyrelai's voice carried no anger, only a deep weariness. He was the court's most promising young mage, brilliant and passionate. And he was my lover. Kale's breath caught. Your lover? She rose gracefully, moving to the circle's edge until only the invisible barrier separated them. I was not always as you see me now. Once I ruled the Twilight Realm in harmony with the mortal world. Our peoples traded knowledge, art, magic. And Matthias... Her voice softened. Matthias was the bridge between our worlds. What happened? Fear. The word came out bitter. When neighboring kingdoms learned of our relationship, they branded it unnatural. They convinced King Aldrich that I was corrupting his kingdom through dark magic. She touched the chains at her wrists, and they chimed sadly. The king demanded Matthias choose, his position and his people's safety, or me. Kale felt his heart clench at the pain in her voice. He chose them. Worse, to prove his loyalty, he created this curse, bound me between realms so I could never return to threaten his precious kingdom. Her violet eyes blazed with old hurt. The irony is exquisite. He used our love letters as components in the spell. Every word of affection became a link in these chains. The scholar in Kale was fascinated, but the man was appalled. That's monstrous, yet perfectly logical from a political standpoint. Lyrelai sank down again, her wings folding around her like a protective cocoon. The curse can only be broken by one of his bloodline willingly taking my place, or... She hesitated. By genuine love freely given without expectation of reward. And in 1,000 years no one has tried? Oh, many have tried. Knights seeking glory, mages seeking power, fools seeking to control me. Her laugh was hollow. But love? True love requires trust, vulnerability, connection. Hard to achieve when most see only a demon to be feared or conquered. Kale found himself moving closer to the barrier. What do you see when you look at me? She studied his face intently, her gaze tracing his features. I see his eyes, yes, but softer. His curiosity, but tempered with compassion. You have his hands. She gestured to where his fingers rested near the circle's edge. But yours are gentle, unmarked by the calluses of war magic. Without thinking, Kale pressed his palm against the invisible barrier. To his surprise, Lyrelai mirrored the gesture from her side. Though they couldn't touch, he felt a strange warmth spread through his hand. The binding recognizes you, she whispered, wonder creeping into her voice. I can feel your life force, your emotions. It's been so long since I've felt anything beyond my own pain. What does it feel like? He asked, mesmerized by the way her purple skin seemed to glow where her hand pressed against the barrier. Like sunrise after an eternal night, she breathed. Like the first warm rain after drought. You make me remember what it felt like to be alive rather than merely existing. Their eyes met and held, and Kale felt something shift in his chest. This wasn't just scholarly fascination anymore. This beautiful, tragic being stirred something deeper in him, something that made him want to ease her centuries of loneliness. Lyrelai, he said her name like a prayer. Tell me everything about this curse. I want to understand. Growing connection. A week had passed since their first real conversation, and Kyle found himself returning to the tower each evening as if drawn by invisible threads. He brought books, food, and blankets, transforming the cold stone chamber into something resembling a sanctuary. Lyrelai watched his efforts with growing amusement and something deeper that neither dared name. You don't have to stay, she said one evening as Kyle arranged cushions outside the circle. The binding doesn't require your physical presence. I know, he replied, settling down with a leather satchel. But I want to be here, with you. The simple honesty of his words made her chest tighten in ways she'd forgotten were possible. Over the centuries, she'd grown accustomed to solitude. But Kale's presence had awakened a hunger for companionship she'd thought long dead. "What did you bring tonight?" she asked, folding her legs gracefully beneath her. The purple hue of her skin seemed to shimmer in the candlelight he'd placed around the room. "Poetry," Kale said, producing a slim volume. "From the Twilight Courts, actually. I thought you might recognize some of it." Lyralei's eyes widened in surprise. "You found texts from my realm? But they were all destroyed when—" "Hidden, not destroyed. There's a private collection in the capital's underground library." He opened the book carefully. "Listen to this. In shadows deep where starlight dwells, two hearts beat as morning bells. Though realms divide and time may flow, love transcends what mortals know." She closed her eyes, and for a moment her regal composure cracked. "Valdris wrote that. He was my court poet before," she gestured vaguely, "before everything changed. Tell me about your court. What was it like before the curse?" Lyralei's expression grew distant, nostalgic. "Imagine a palace carved from twilight itself, where the walls shifted between day and night. Gardens that bloomed with flowers made of crystallized music. Fountains that sang lullabies to the moon." Her voice grew softer. "I held salons where mortals and immortals shared knowledge freely. Matthias loved those gatherings. He said they made him feel like the universe was infinite with possibility." Kale found himself captivated not just by her words, but by the way her features softened when she spoke of happier times. "It sounds beautiful." "It was home," she said simply. "Now it exists only in memory." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, the weight of her loss settling between them. Then Kale did something that surprised them both. He began to read aloud from the poetry collection, his voice steady and warm in the quiet chamber. As he read, Lyrelei found herself studying his face in the candlelight. The way his dark hair fell across his forehead when he concentrated, the gentle curve of his mouth as he shaped the ancient words, the earnest intelligence in his brown eyes. He was nothing like Matthias, she realized. Where her former lover had been ambitious and calculating, Kale seemed driven by genuine curiosity and compassion. "Your turn," he said, closing the book and sliding it toward the barrier. "I cannot touch it," she reminded him gently. "Then recite something from memory, please." Lyrelei considered for a moment, then began to speak in her native tongue, the words flowing like liquid silver. Though Kale couldn't understand them, the melody of her voice sent shivers down his spine. When she finished, she translated softly. "Love is the bridge between two souls, built not of stone or steel but of trust given freely, of vulnerability shared willingly, of two hearts choosing to beat in harmony despite the chaos of the world." "Did you write that?" A faint blush colored her purple cheeks. "Long ago, when I still believed such things were possible." "Maybe they still are," Kale said quietly. Their gazes locked across the barrier, and the air seemed to thicken with unspoken possibilities. Lyrelei felt something stir within her. Not just attraction, but something deeper and more dangerous. Hope. "Kale," she whispered. "What we're feeling. It's not just the binding's influence, is it?" He moved closer to the circle's edge, close enough that she could see the flecks of gold in his brown eyes. "No. It's not magic making me want to know everything about you. It's not a spell making me dream about freeing you from this prison. It's not enchantment making me wish I could hold you." Her breath caught. "You dream about me?" "Every night," he admitted. "Sometimes we're walking through your twilight gardens. Sometimes we're just talking like this, but without the barrier between us. And sometimes—" He trailed off, his cheeks reddening. "Sometimes?" she prompted, her voice barely a whisper. "Sometimes I dream about kissing you," he confessed. "About holding you while you sleep. About waking up beside you in a world where curses don't exist." Lyrelei pressed both hands against the invisible barrier, her violet eyes blazing with emotion. "I dream too. Of warmth that doesn't come from magic. Of touch that doesn't burn. Of a heart beating against mine." She leaned forward until her forehead nearly touched the barrier. "I dream of you, Kale Thorne, and it terrifies me." "Why?" "Because," she said, her voice breaking slightly. "Because I'm starting to believe those dreams might be worth the risk of hoping again." Kale mirrored her position, their faces separated by mere inches and an ancient curse. "Then let's find a way to make them real." The choice. The 13th night changed everything. Kale arrived at the tower to find the chamber filled with an oppressive darkness that seemed to swallow his candlelight. Lirelei stood rigid within her circle, her wings spread defensively, violet eyes blazing with alarm. "You shouldn't have come tonight," she said urgently. "They've found us." "Who?" But even as he asked, shadows began materializing around the room's perimeter. Tall figures in flowing robes emerged from the darkness, their faces hidden beneath deep hoods. The temperature plummeted and frost began forming on the stone walls. "The Shadow Council," Lirelei whispered. "My former subjects who seek to claim my power now that the binding has weakened." The largest figure stepped forward, its voice like grinding stone. "Queen Lirelei, you have been absent from your throne for far too long. The realm grows restless without proper leadership. I am bound, Malachar. You know this." Her voice carried centuries of royal authority despite her imprisonment. Bound, yes, but no longer unreachable. The figure's hood turned toward Kale. "This mortal has created a bridge. Through him, we can access your power. Drain it slowly until you're forced to return to us." Kyle felt ice form in his veins as he understood the implications. "You want to use me as a conduit?" "The boy understands quickly," another shadow hissed. "Surrender yourself willingly, mortal, and we will make your death swift. Resist, and we will take decades to drain both your life and her power." Lyrelei's chains suddenly flared brilliant silver, and she strained against them with renewed fury. "Touch him, and I will find a way to destroy you all, binding or no binding." "Empty threats from a caged queen," Malachar laughed coldly. "You cannot even leave your circle." But Kale was already moving. He'd spent weeks studying the binding circle, memorizing every symbol and line. His hand found the small silver dagger he'd taken to carrying, and without hesitation, he drew it across his palm. "Kale, no!" Lirelei screamed. Fresh blood dripped onto the circle's edge, and the symbols erupted in purple fire. The binding magic recognized his sacrifice and responded, temporarily expanding Lyrelei's prison to include him. He stumbled across the barrier just as the shadows lunged forward. Lirelei caught him as he fell, her arms wrapping around him protectively. For the first time in over a millennium, she held another being against her body, felt the warmth of living flesh, the rhythm of a beating heart. The sensation was overwhelming. "You fool," she whispered against his hair. But her voice carried no anger, only desperate affection. "You beautiful, brave fool." The shadows recoiled from the circle's expanded edge, unable to cross the barrier that now protected them both. But Malachar's laughter was triumphant. "Excellent. Now you're both trapped together. We can drain you both at our leisure, and when you're weak enough, we'll simply wait for the binding to collapse entirely." Kale struggled to his feet, marveling at the feel of Lyrelei's hands steadying him. Her skin was warm, not cold as he'd expected, with a subtle luminescence that seemed to pulse in rhythm with his heartbeat. "There has to be another way," he said, looking between her and the menacing shadows. "Some way to break this that doesn't give them what they want." Lyrelei's expression grew pained. "There is. But Kale, the cost. Tell me." "The curse can be shattered instantly if the binding is overloaded with more power than it was designed to contain." She touched his face gently, her purple fingertips tracing his cheekbone. "If someone willingly offers their entire life force at once, not gradually, the magical feedback would destroy the prison." "And the person making the sacrifice?" Her silence was answer enough. "No," he said firmly. "There has to be another way." "The only other option is love," she said quietly. "But true love, absolute and without reservation. Both souls must be willing to sacrifice everything for the other, simultaneously. The binding cannot contain such pure emotion." Kyle stared into her violet eyes, seeing his own reflection multiplied in their depths. Around them, the shadows pressed closer, testing the barrier's strength. Time was running out. "Do you love me?" he asked simply. Lyrelei's breath caught. "Kyle, do you love me, Lirelei? Not gratitude, not desperation, not the echo of what you felt for Matthias." "Me?" "Yes," she whispered, tears beginning to glow silver on her cheeks. "Against all reason, despite all caution, in defiance of 1,000 years of pain. Yes, I love you." "Then trust me." He cupped her face in his hands, thumb brushing away her luminous tears. "Trust us." Before she could protest, he leaned forward and pressed his lips to hers. The kiss was gentle at first, tentative, but as she melted against him, it deepened into something that transcended mere physical touch. It was the meeting of two souls who had found their completion in each other. The moment their lips met, the binding circle exploded with light so bright it turned the shadows to mist. Power coursed between them, around them, through them, not draining or destructive, but transformative. Lyralee's chains didn't shatter. They dissolved into starlight that swirled around the embracing couple. When the light faded, they stood in each other's arms, unmarked and unchanged, except for the look of wonder in their eyes. The shadows were gone, banished by the force of their connection. How? Lyralee breathed against his lips. Love freely given, Cale murmured back. No conditions, no expectations, just love. And for the first time in 1,000 years, the Demon Queen was free. Breaking the chains, the tower fell silent except for the sound of their breathing, hearts beating in perfect synchronization. Lyralee pulled back slightly to study Cale's face, her violet eyes wide with disbelief. The curse, she whispered, flexing her fingers experimentally. I can't feel it anymore. The weight, the chains, the constant pull between realms, it's gone. Cale smiled, his thumb tracing the elegant curve of her cheekbone. How do you feel? Alive, she breathed, wonder coloring her voice. Truly alive for the first time since... Her words trailed off as she pressed closer to him, marveling at the solid warmth of his body against hers. Is this real? Are we real? In answer, he kissed her again, slower this time, savoring the softness of her lips, the way she melted into his embrace. When they broke apart, both were breathless. What happens now? Kyle asked, resting his forehead against hers. The Shadow Council, your realm. We'll have to find another way to survive without draining my power, Lyralee said firmly. I am no longer bound to the old laws, the old obligations. For the first time in millennia, I can choose my own path. And what do you choose? She smiled, the expression transforming her face from regal beauty to something radiant and entirely human. You, us, whatever we can build together. Cale's heart swelled, but practical concerns nagged at him. Where will we go? You're still a demon queen and I'm just a scholar. The world isn't exactly welcoming to our kind of love. Then we'll make our own world, she said with quiet determination. I still have power, Cale. Not the cursed bound power of before, but something new, something that belongs entirely to me. She gestured, and the ruined tower around them began to shift and change. Stone flowed like water, reshaping itself into smooth walls adorned with intricate carvings. Windows expanded, letting in moonlight that seemed to dance with silver fire. The cold, empty chamber transformed into a circular library with shelves that stretched impossibly high. Filled with books from both realms. Magic, Cale breathed, watching in amazement as furniture materialized. Comfortable chairs, a large bed draped in midnight blue silk, a desk where his journals and her ancient texts lay side by side. Our magic, she corrected, taking his hand. The curse is broken, but the bond between us remains. We're connected now by choice, not compulsion. As if to prove her point, Cale felt a warm pulse of energy flow from their joined hands. Where her purple skin touched his, both began to glow softly. Not with the harsh light of magic, but with something gentler and infinitely more precious. I can feel your thoughts, he said in wonder. Not invasively, but like an echo of harmony. And I can feel your heart, she replied, her voice thick with emotion. The love there is so pure, so strong. It amazes me that someone could feel that way about me. How could I not? He lifted their joined hands to his lips, pressing a gentle kiss to her knuckles. You're magnificent, Lyralee. Not because you're a queen or because you wield power, but because of who you are underneath all the titles. Your strength, your resilience, your capacity for love despite centuries of betrayal and pain. Tears, no longer glowing silver but perfectly human, slipped down her cheeks. I never thought I would hear such words again. Never dared to hope. Hope, Cale repeated softly. That's what you gave me too. Purpose beyond dusty books and forgotten histories. A reason to believe in magic again. She laughed through her tears, the sound like music in the transformed space. What a pair we make. A cursed demon queen and a lonely scholar finding salvation in each other. The best kind of love story, he agreed, then grew more serious. But truly, what about your realm? Your people who weren't part of the Shadow Council? Lyralee was quiet for a moment, considering. There are portals, pathways between worlds that I can open now that I'm free. Those who wish to can come and go as they please. Others may choose to remain in the Twilight Realm and govern themselves. She squeezed his hand. I've been a queen for over 2,000 years, Cale. I think I've earned the right to step down and simply be myself. And who is that? Who is Lorelei when she's not a queen? I'm still discovering that, she admitted. But I know she's someone who wants to wake up every morning beside the man she loves. Someone who wants to learn about his world while sharing her own. Someone who wants to write new stories instead of being trapped in old ones. Cale pulled her close, holding her against his chest where she could feel the steady rhythm of his heart. I loved the sound of that. They stood together in their transformed sanctuary, two souls who had found their home in each other. Outside, the world continued its ancient dance of conflict and chaos. But within these walls, they had created something new, a space where love had conquered curse, where hope had triumphed over despair. So what do we do first? Lorelei asked, tilting her head up to look at him. Cale smiled, his eyes twinkling with mischief and affection. Well, we have eternity to figure it out, but I was thinking we could start with you teaching me more of that poetry in your native tongue, and maybe, his voice grew husky, exploring some of those dreams we've been having. Lorelei's laugh was pure joy as she rose on her toes to kiss him again. I like the way you think, my beloved scholar. And in a tower that had once been a prison, two hearts began to write the first chapter of their forever. The end.